My dad left us a secret inheritance, but the truth almost destroyed our family. I always thought my dad was an ordinary man, hardworking, loving, and devoted to our family. But when he passed away, we discovered he had left behind a secret inheritance, one that wasn't just about money. It was something far bigger, something that nearly tore our family apart. What he hid from us all those years changed the way I saw him forever. Now, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Growing up, my dad was the kind of man everyone respected. He worked long hours, provided for our family, and never complained. He wasn't the type to shower us with extravagant gifts or take us on lavish vacations, but he made sure we had everything we needed. My siblings and I never questioned anything about our life. Why would we? We had a roof over our heads, food on the table, and a father who always put us first. But looking back, there were things that never quite added up. He never talked about his past, never mentioned his childhood, and avoided answering questions about his family. We assumed it was just painful memories he didn't want to revisit, so we never pushed him. Then, when he passed away, everything changed. It started with a letter, one he had left specifically for me. Out of all my siblings, I was the one closest to him, and in his final moments, he must have known I was the only one who could handle what he was about to reveal. The letter was simple. "There's something I need you to do. Look inside my old study, behind the bookshelf." That was it. No explanations, no apologies, just instructions. My heart pounded as I read it over and over again. I had never thought of my dad as a man with secrets, but now I wasn't so sure. I waited until everyone was asleep before making my way to his study. It was a place we were never really allowed to go into, and now I wondered why. As I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of old books and wood polish filled my nose. I ran my hands along the bookshelf, searching for anything unusual, and then I found it. A hidden latch. My fingers trembled as I pulled it, and the entire bookshelf shifted, revealing a concealed compartment. Inside was a locked metal box covered in dust, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever was inside, my dad had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden, and now it was my turn to uncover the truth. I hesitated before touching the box, my mind racing with possibilities. What could my father have hidden all these years? And why had he entrusted me with this secret instead of anyone else in the family? I took a deep breath, picked up the heavy metal container, and placed it on his old desk. It was locked, but my gut told me the key had to be somewhere in this room. My father was meticulous. He wouldn't have left something this important without ensuring I could open it. I searched through his drawers, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. I had always known my father as a strong, steady presence, a man who never wavered, but now I was seeing him in a different light. If he had secrets, what else did I not know about him? My hands shook as I rummaged through the last drawer, and then I found it. A small brass key wrapped in an old handkerchief. It felt almost ceremonial, like my father had left this here with purpose, knowing I would find it. I swallowed hard, took the key, and turned back to the box. With a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock and twisted. A faint click echoed through the silent room. The lid creaked as I lifted it, revealing stacks of old photographs, letters, and documents. I picked up the first photo, and my heart stopped. It was my father, but younger, maybe in his 20s, and he wasn't alone. He stood beside a woman I had never seen before, holding a small child. My stomach clenched. This wasn't my mother, and that child wasn't any of my siblings. My fingers trembled as I flipped the photo over. There was a date written on the back, years before he had even met my mother. My mind spun as I tried to make sense of it. Had my father had another family? If so, why had he never told us? I dug through the letters, scanning the handwriting. Some were addressed to my father, signed by the same woman from the photograph. Others were written by my father himself, but never sent. My breath caught as I read the words he had written, his pain etched into every line. He had been carrying this burden his entire life, hiding a truth that now threatened to change everything I thought I knew about him. I forced myself to keep reading, even as my hands shook. My father's words were raw, filled with regret and longing. He spoke of a love he had lost, of a child he had to leave behind. The letters detailed moments of joy and pain, how he had held his son for the first time, how he had promised to be there always, and how circumstances had forced him to break that promise. My stomach twisted as I pieced the story together. My father had a son before me, a brother I never knew existed. I scanned the documents beneath the letters, desperate for more answers. There was a birth certificate. His name was Michael. He would be older than me, probably in his late 40s by now. The mother's name was Sarah Mitchell. I didn't recognize it, but something about it felt oddly familiar. I flipped through more papers and found a court document. My father had fought for custody at some point, but had lost. There was also an old address scribbled in my father's handwriting. Had he ever tried to reach out? Had Michael ever wanted to find him? A rush of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, confusion, sadness. Why had my father kept this from us? Why had he chosen to take this secret to his grave rather than tell us about Michael? I thought back to my childhood, to all the times my father had been lost in thought, staring at old photographs. Was he thinking about his first son? Did he regret never being in his life? And more than anything, what did this mean for me? I sat back in the chair trying to breathe. This changed everything I thought I knew about my father, but I needed more answers. There was only one person left who might have them, my mother. I clenched the letters in my hands, my mind racing as I tried to process everything. A brother, a whole person out there, carrying my father's blood, living a life I knew nothing about. I had so many questions, and only one person who might have the answers. I stood up, my heart pounding, and went straight to my mother's house. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, stirring a pot of soup like it was any normal day. But for me, nothing felt normal anymore. "Mom," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. She turned, smiling at first, but then her expression shifted as she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the spoon down. I took a deep breath and placed the letters on the table. "I found these in Dad's things," I said. "I know about Michael." For a moment, she didn't move. It was like time had frozen around us. Then, she closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. "I was hoping you'd never have to find out this way," she said quietly, sitting down. "So, it's true?" My voice wavered. "He had another son?" She nodded, staring at the letters like they might disappear if she blinked. "Yes," she admitted. "Your father, he made mistakes before he met me. He fell in love, and they had a child. But things didn't work out between them. The mother moved away and refused to let him be a part of Michael's life." I swallowed hard, my emotions boiling over. Why didn't he ever tell us? Why did he keep it a secret? She hesitated, then looked at me with tired, sorrowful eyes. Because it hurt him more than anything. He tried to find Michael for years. He wrote letters. He searched. But he always came up short. And after a while, he gave up. Not because he stopped loving him, but because he didn't want to keep reopening that wound. I shook my head, struggling to understand. "So, what now? Do you know where he is? Do you even know if he's still alive?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "The last thing your father ever found was an address, but that was decades ago. I don't know where he is now." I stared at her, the weight of this truth settling deep in my chest. My father had spent his whole life longing for a son he could never reach. And now, that son might still be out there, completely unaware that his father had never stopped looking for him. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but one thing was certain. I had to find Michael. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling around the same thought. Michael was out there somewhere, and he had no idea that my father had never stopped thinking about him. I stared at the old address my mother had mentioned, scribbled in my father's careful handwriting. It was from years ago, but it was the only lead I had. I had to start somewhere. The next morning, I took the day off work, got in my car, and drove across the city to the address. As I pulled up to the house, my stomach twisted. It was an old, weathered place, the kind that looked like it had stories trapped inside its walls. I hesitated before knocking, my heart hammering in my chest. What if this was a dead end? What if Michael wanted nothing to do with us? After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. A woman in her 60s answered, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing me warily. I cleared my throat. I'm looking for Michael Mitchell. Does he live here?" Her expression changed instantly. For a moment, I thought she might slam the door in my face, but instead, she just stared at me, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice guarded. I took a deep breath. "My name is Daniel. My father was James Carter. I think Michael is my brother." Her eyes widened, and for a second she looked like she might cry. Then she exhaled sharply and shook her head. "You should go," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "Michael doesn't live here anymore, and even if he did, he wouldn't want to see you." Panic surged through me. "Please, I just need to talk to him. My father, our father, he passed away recently. and I found letters he wrote to Michael. He never stopped thinking about him. Something flickered across her face, pain, maybe even guilt, but she shook her head again. "It's too late for that," she murmured. I stepped forward, desperate. "Please, if you know where he is, just tell me. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to find him." She hesitated, looking torn, but then she sighed and stepped back. "I don't know exactly where he is now, but last I heard, he was in Chicago," she admitted. "That's all I can tell you." Chicago, that was something. My chest tightened as I nodded. "Thank you," I said softly. As I walked back to my car, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't stopping now. I had to find Michael, no matter what it took. The drive back home was a blur. My mind was racing with the possibility that, after all these years, my father's lost son, my brother, was still out there. Chicago was a big city, and I had no clue where to start, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open, searching through every People Finder website I could find. I typed in Michael Mitchell, Chicago, and scrolled through pages of results. Too many. Some had phone numbers, some had addresses, but none of them screamed, "This is him." After hours of searching, my eyes burned from staring at the screen. I needed something more personal, a social media search. I scrolled through Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, hoping something would click. Then, after what felt like 100 dead ends, I found it. A Facebook profile. No picture, just a name. Michael Mitchell, based in Chicago. Barely any posts, but one caught my eye. A photo uploaded 2 years ago. A blurry shot of a man standing on a pier, the city skyline in the background, no caption. But something about it, his posture, the way he stood with his hands in his pockets, it felt familiar. Could this be him? I hesitated before clicking message. What could I even say? "Hey, I think you might be my brother." No, too direct. "Hi, I'm Daniel Carter. My father was James Carter. I think we might be related." I stared at the words, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, before I could overthink it, I hit send, and then nothing. I checked back every hour. Nothing. The message was still sitting there, unread. The next day I checked again. Still unread. Was this even the right Michael? Had he abandoned this account? Or worse, had he seen my message and chosen to ignore it? A week passed, still nothing. My frustration grew, but I refused to give up. If my father had spent decades holding on to hope, I could at least give this more time. Then one night, just as I was about to shut my laptop, my phone buzzed. A notification, my heart nearly stopped. "Michael Mitchell has replied to your message." I took a deep breath before clicking it open. "Who the hell are you?" It wasn't exactly the response I'd hoped for. My hands tightened around my phone as I stared at the message. "Who the hell are you?" It wasn't exactly warm, but at least it was a response. I took a deep breath and started typing. "I know this is coming out of nowhere, but my name is Daniel Carter. My father was James Carter. I believe he was also your father." I hesitated before hitting send. What if I was wrong? What if this man had nothing to do with my family, and I was just dragging some stranger into a mess he never asked for? But at this point, I had nothing to lose. The dots appeared. He was typing. I held my breath. "My father was Henry Mitchell. I don't know a James Carter. Wrong guy." I felt my stomach drop. Was this another dead end? But something about the way he dismissed it so quickly made me suspicious. My fingers flew over the keyboard. "Are you sure? My father told me he had a son in Chicago. Your name matches. Can we talk? Just for a minute?" I watched as the message sat there, seen, no response. Seconds stretched into minutes, and my hope started to fade. Then, just when I thought he had ghosted me, another message popped up. "What do you want?" I let out a breath. He was at least willing to talk. That was something. "Just the truth. Can we meet?" There was a long pause. I could almost feel his hesitation through the screen. Finally, a reply. "Fine. Tomorrow. Navy Pier. 5 p.m. Don't make me regret this." I barely slept that night. My mind raced with possibilities. What if he really was my brother? What if he wanted nothing to do with me? What if he had no idea he was even adopted? The next day, I got to Navy Pier early, heart pounding. I stood near the railing, looking out at the water, when I felt someone behind me. "Daniel?" I turned around, and there he was. Same piercing blue eyes as my father. Same furrowed brow. But his expression was guarded, almost hostile. "So," he said, crossing his arms, "start talking." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. The answers I'd spent years looking for were right in front of me. But even now, with everything hanging on the line, I couldn't help but feel like I was staring into the unknown. "I know this sounds crazy," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "But I believe you're my brother. My father, James Carter, told me about you. He said you were out there, somewhere in Chicago. I thought you might be him, but now I'm starting to think I was right." He blinked a few times, clearly processing the information, and then let out a short laugh. "This is insane. Are you saying my father was your father?" He looked at me like I had 3 heads. "I know it sounds impossible," I said quickly, "but I'm not crazy. I know my father's past, and the more I dig, the more it all adds up. That's why I came here. I need to know. Was my father really your father too?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just stared at me, searching my face like he was trying to find something that would tell him whether or not I was lying. "Well," he finally said, taking a step back, "this is a hell of a conversation, but you have no idea how much I don't want this to be true." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. "What?" I asked, stunned. "I said, I don't want it to be true," he repeated, his voice growing colder. "Look, I don't know who you are, but this is just too much for me. I'm not ready to deal with it." My chest tightened as I fought to keep my composure. "I didn't ask for any of this," I shot back, my voice thick with emotion. "But I need to know the truth. Can't you just tell me if there's any possibility that we share the same father?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. My father wasn't the man you think he was." At his words, a knot formed in my stomach. This was it. The moment I realized things weren't going to be as easy as I hoped. "What do you mean?" He paused before speaking, almost like he was choosing his words carefully. "My dad, he wasn't a good person. He wasn't who you think he was. If we share the same father, then you deserve to know that too." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared for a man to tell me that my father, my hero, wasn't who I thought he was. I felt my world begin to tilt. The weight of his words settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak, and for a moment, I didn't know how to breathe. The man who had been the foundation of my entire existence, the man I had always looked up to, admired, and loved, was now being painted as something dark, something twisted. The thought that he might have been someone else entirely made my head spin. "Wait," I said, taking a step back. "Are you saying my father was a bad person? Are you telling me he hurt people?" He didn't look at me as he spoke. His eyes were downcast, filled with what looked like regret, guilt, and maybe even a little fear. "He hurt a lot of people," he muttered. "I don't know the details, but I've heard enough to know that he wasn't the father you think he was." My mind was racing now, trying to put the pieces together. Everything I thought I knew was being turned upside down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit him for saying such things about my dad. But I knew deep down that I needed to hear this, that I needed the truth, no matter how painful it was. "But why?" I asked, almost whispering, the words escaping as if I was afraid to hear the answer. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't he ever tell me about this side of him?" The man sighed deeply, his face contorting with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "You don't want to know, trust me. There are some things better left buried. You're better off not knowing the whole truth. Believe me, I've seen what this can do to people." "No," I said, my voice sharp. "I need to know. I don't care how much it hurts. I need the truth." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at me with a mixture of pity and something else, something darker. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "Your father had secrets. He wasn't just a man in the eyes of the world. He was hiding things that you can't even begin to imagine, things that changed everything for me, and maybe for you too." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat loud in my ears. Every fiber of my being screamed for answers. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth anymore. What could it possibly be that was so terrible? What was so bad that this stranger, this half-brother of mine, was pleading with me not to find out? The room felt suffocating as I waited for him to continue, my mind spinning with questions, each one darker than the last. I couldn't understand what could be so bad, so horrifying, that my father, my hero, had hidden it from me. Had he lied to me all these years? Had he kept a side of himself that was beyond my wildest imagination? "Please," I said, my voice shaky, barely a whisper. "I need to know. What are you talking about? What did he do?" For a moment, he hesitated, glancing at me with a conflicted look. It was as if he was wrestling with himself, torn between revealing something that could change my life forever, or keeping the silence that had kept him safe for so long. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost too quiet to hear. Your father? He wasn't just a man who loved his family. He was involved in things, bad things. I don't know all the details, but I know enough to tell you that he hurt people. People he shouldn't have. People who trusted him, people who never suspected a thing. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My head reeled, and I could barely catch my breath. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears as I processed what he was saying. My father, this man I'd spent my whole life idolizing, was not who I thought he was. He had done things I couldn't even begin to fathom. What kind of man was he? The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, as I tried to digest the revelation. Finally I spoke, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why keep this from me all these years? He didn't look at me as he answered, his voice tinged with regret. I wasn't sure if you were ready to hear it. I wasn't sure how to tell you that the man you saw as perfect, as your father, wasn't who you thought he was. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My entire world was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My father had kept his secrets for so long, and now they were finally spilling out, leaving me to pick up the broken pieces. What else? I asked, my voice strained, my chest tight with a mix of fear and anger. What else did he do? He finally looked up at me, his expression pained. There's more, but I don't think you're ready for it. Just know that he wasn't the man you thought he was. He had a side to him that you could never have imagined. The weight of his words settled on me, heavy and unrelenting. I didn't know what to feel. Betrayal, anger, sadness. Maybe all of those things. All I knew was that my life would never be the same again. My father's legacy was now stained with a darkness I couldn't undo. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything he had just told me. The man I thought I knew, the man who had raised me, loved me, and protected me, was now nothing more than a stranger. A man who had kept the darkest secrets buried deep, and I had been blind to it all. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to cry. I was too numb, too shaken by the weight of the truth. It was as if the foundation of everything I had ever believed in was crumbling beneath my feet. My father had always been the rock, the unwavering presence in my life, but now that rock had shattered. How could he have kept such a dark side hidden? How could he have fooled everyone, including me? I turned to look at my uncle, searching for answers, for some kind of comfort. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, his eyes filled with sympathy and regret. I wish I could tell you what to do, but this is something only you can come to terms with. The truth is ugly and it's painful, but it's your truth now. The finality of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no going back, no erasing the truth. The man I had admired, the man I had looked up to, was forever tainted in my eyes. I would never be able to see him the same way again. It was hard to even imagine a future without that image of him, the perfect father, the loving husband, the pillar of our family. But that image had been shattered, and I would have to rebuild it, piece by piece. Is there anything else I need to know? I asked, barely able to speak through the lump in my throat. He paused for a long moment, clearly struggling with the weight of what he was about to say. There's a lot more, but right now, I think it's best if you take some time to process this. You don't need to know everything at once. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I needed time. Time to come to terms with this new reality. Time to figure out how to move forward. As I left my uncle's house that day, the world felt different. The man I had once known as my father was gone, replaced by a stranger whose actions had shattered my trust, my love, and my memories. And as I walked away, I realized that life would never be the same again.